Russia right now seems to be launching systematic sabotage against Europe. This is already the third factory in Europe in the past week to suffer an unexpected accident and fires. Overnight into Tuesday, August 18th, a large fire broke out at the Stora Enso factory in the Finnish city of Imatra. It's notable that the factory itself is located just 10 kilometers from the border with Russia. The causes of the fire at this factory are still being investigated, and the factory is not connected to the country's defense industry. But the thing is, this is happening against the backdrop described today by the president of Latvia. Russia's hybrid war in Europe is already underway. At the same time, Russia has threatened Britain over British drones that are currently flying over Russia. Although I'm sure the Kremlin has known about this for a long time. But only when everyone started talking about it publicly did the Kremlin decide to threaten the British with a retaliatory strike. Russia sent a frigate armed with hypersonic missiles to a German island. And a week earlier, let me remind you, an ammunition factory exploded in Italy and another one in Bulgaria. And here we have a real paradox, because while all this is happening in Europe, Donald Trump's trusted representative secretly flew to St. Petersburg for negotiations with the Kremlin. Let's break down all the latest events in this episode, put everything in order and lay it out clearly. My name is Alexei Pesci. Let's get started. But first, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. We're moving toward the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I would be grateful for every subscription. So let's start with the most important news. In Finland, there was an explosion at the Stora Enso forestry company's plant, after which a fire broke out. The plant is located about 10 kilometers from the Russian border. As a result of the explosion, a fuel oil tank caught fire. Fortunately, no one was injured. Stora Enso is an industrial company that produces renewable materials and products based on wood fiber. And according to preliminary estimates, about 50 cubic meters of fuel oil spilled on the plant grounds. The fire was extinguished in just over 2 hours, and about 15 rescue units took part in this operation. And now the Finns are saying that this incident is not necessarily connected to Russians. But factories in Europe have started catching fire far too often over the past week. Earlier, on August 13, an explosion followed by a fire occurred at a large ammunition factory near Rome. The accident happened in the gunpowder pressing workshop at the KNDS Ammo Italy factory. And the company produces medium and large caliber shells for land and naval defense, as well as solid rocket fuel. And the day before, let me remind you, a weapons factory in Bulgaria caught fire. And here it's important to note the statement made by the president of Latvia, Edgars Rinkēvičs. Speaking at a press conference on the border with Belarus, he said, and I quote, "This is not something that will start sometime in the future. It is happening right now." That's how he commented on Russia's hybrid war against Europe. And here's another incident. Latvian law enforcement is currently investigating a fire at a warehouse belonging to a charity organization that was delivering aid to Ukraine, as well as a whole range of other cases: sabotage, provocations, and espionage. And Bloomberg specifically notes that Europe is seeing a surge in sabotage activity ranging from, let me remind you, a drone with explosives near a Ukrainian plane in Germany to arson and even attempted contract killings. And it's important to note here that earlier the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, directly threatened that Russia would step up its fight against those in Europe who are actively helping to arm the Ukrainian armed forces. And today a new threat was made, this time directed at Britain. The Russian embassy in London stated that Britain, quote, "will inevitably have to bear responsibility for being complicit in the aggressive regime." The reason was the confirmation that Ukraine is using British drones to strike deep into Russian territory, which I mentioned earlier in the previous episode of Literally Today. The deep mission also added that as Britain's involvement in the war increases, the price it will have to pay will also increase. There aren't many specifics, but it's possible that something might start burning in Britain soon as well. Well, that's just how those Russians are. They can't really do anything except sabotage and arson. And let's be honest, I'm sure the Russians knew perfectly well that Ukraine is using British drones, because we've been using them for half a year already. Not realizing in 6 months that British drones are flying at you is complete nonsense. But the Russians only started blustering and making threats after journalists had already publicly confirmed that yes, British drones are flying over Russian territory. And then Russia decided to demonstrate its power at sea. According to the Telegraph, Russia sent the frigate Admiral Kasatonov to the German coast in the Baltic Sea, equipped with Caliber cruise missiles and Zircon hypersonic missiles, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The ship was spotted near the German tourist island of Fehmarn. It was moving with its location transmitter turned off. And this is already the second warship of the Russian Northern Fleet transferred to the Baltic in recent weeks. Let me remind you, at the end of July, the destroyer Admiral Levchenko was already sent there. And the deployment of the frigate happened right after the threats from the bold dictator Vladimir Putin to start by seizing Western ships in response to the detention of Russian tankers from the Shadow Fleet. On August 13, Vladimir Putin instructed the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation to respond in kind to what he called piracy and banditry by European countries. And he added, quote, "Not necessarily in the waters where raids on our ships are planned, but wherever we ourselves consider it necessary, anywhere." And after him, the deputy chairman spoke. The deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Russia's chief drunkard Dimka Medvedev, this one, in short, the one who belongs to Putin. So he went even further, stating that Russia has the right to attack merchant ships of unfriendly countries if it suspects them of transporting goods in the interests of the enemy. Well, we've already mentioned the factory in Italy in this episode. Now, in Italy, they're saying that Russia might not actually be involved. Last week, the KNDS Ama Italia munition factory in Califera near Rome exploded. This facility produces medium and large caliber ammunition, as well as solid rocket fuel for aerospace launch vehicles. And now the newspaper La Repubblica reports that the Italian prosecutor's office is investigating a possible connection between this explosion and similar incidents at facilities in Bulgaria. And now the leader of the opposition Action Party, Carlo Calenda, has publicly demanded that the government inform parliament about the progress of the investigation. Here is his quote. "We cannot remain uncertain about a possible Russian hybrid attack." Well, the Italian Minister of Defense Guido Crosetto has already stated that the Italian government does not have any information indicating Russia's involvement in the explosion at the plant. Here is a quote from Crosetto. "There are no signs that would give reason to believe that this could be anything other than an internal problem. Although I would note that factories in Europe have started to accidentally catch fire and explode a bit too often. Well, we've already discussed that Russia has switched to a new tactic of using local residents, that is, Europeans who are recruited for money. They are recruited for a one-off act of sabotage in order to cover their tracks as much as possible. Moreover, there are already unfortunately, or I don't even know how to put it, cases when in fact the perpetrators of these acts of sabotage were never found at all. And here I should remind you that on August 10, at the military factory of the EMCO company owned by businessman Emilian Gebrev near the town of Triavna in central Bulgaria, there was also a whole series of explosions. According to preliminary data, a fire broke out at the ammunition warehouse after one of the trucks caught fire. And it's important to remember that Gebrev's factories have been supplying shells, and not only that, to the Ukrainian armed forces for years now. And it's not the first time his factories have been targeted by sabotage from the savage Russians. And while a wave of explosions and threats is sweeping across Europe, a trusted associate of Donald Trump secretly traveled to negotiate with the Kremlin. According to the Financial Times, Rodney Mims Cook Jr., who is the chairman of the US Commission of Fine Arts, The very same person who oversees the construction of Donald Trump's ballroom in the White House received a diplomatic passport in June and visited the St. Petersburg International Economic University on a secret mission. Officially, he spoke at a session called Russia-USA Dialogue of Cultures. But unofficially, he met with Kremlin officials, including Putin's advisor Anton Kobyakov. And at that time, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio publicly said that he knew nothing about any delegation traveling to St. Petersburg, although once again diplomatic passports are issued by the State Department. Cook himself refused to comment on meetings with the unwashed Russians. But the Financial Times writes that most likely the topic of the negotiations could have been Ukraine and the business interests of people close to Trump. But apparently such trips by Trump's people to see Putin don't yield any results. Putin shows no willingness to discuss a settlement. In particular, his close associate Sergei Lavrov once again ruled out freezing the conflict on Friday, citing that this would erase the sacrifice of our grandfathers, and he threatened Western countries with destruction and harsher methods. And against the backdrop of failed attempts to start official negotiations, Western countries, according to the Financial Times, are trying to establish other unofficial channels as well. Well, for example, in July, a meeting of retired officials from Britain, France, Germany and Russia took place in Vienna. And the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, confirmed that in that same month, in Baku, former German and Russian officials also discussed ways to end the war in Ukraine. So, all across Europe there are simultaneous explosions at factories working for Ukraine's defense and logistics. We hear threats against Britain for supplying drones. Russian warships armed with hypersonic missiles are appearing off the coast of Germany. And all this is happening against the backdrop of a direct statement from the president of Latvia that Russia's hybrid war in Europe is happening right now. Meanwhile, as Europe is calculating the damage, a trusted representative of Vladimir Putin has already managed to travel to St. Petersburg on a secret diplomatic mission. But this person returned without any sign that the Kremlin is ready for real negotiations. On the contrary, we see that he is escalating the situation and increasing the number of acts of sabotage in Europe. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.